You know how people say seeing is believing? No, believing is the thing that gets you to seeing the manifestation of what you are hoping for or what you have been told is coming into your life. So before we get into it, I want to ask you if you've seen my life update. So in between these podcast episodes, it's been my dream for a long time and it's finally just happening. I have published like a life update, which is kind of like a blog. It's like things that I've been enjoying, things that have inspired me, stuff I like, just to kind of talk a bit more. I think sometimes in this podcast like setup, you may not get to know me as much. It's kind of like what's been happening on my Instagram stories, but more in a more like permanent form. So it will be linked in the show notes for this episode, which will be in the notes on Apple Podcast, Spotify Podcast, and also in the YouTube description. And yeah, take a look, let me know what you think, and yeah, let's keep talking. Welcome back to another episode of the Take What You Need podcast. And today we're talking about something that I am so passionate about, and it is the art of spiritual manifestation. First of all, what is manifestation? What does that mean? What do you mean by spiritual manifestation? Especially because in our current like cultural landscape, in the world that we live in, people talk about manifestation all the time. And I think depending on where you think your beliefs are or where you anchor your different beliefs, you might really be excited and energized when I say manifestation. Or you might be like side-eyeing it. You might be side-eyeing it because you're like, I'm really practical. I don't like to live in made up land. But you might also be side-eyeing it because you're like, oh, manifestation, that represents something that is not aligned with my values. And you might even be thinking, hang on, Abiola, I thought that it would not be aligned with your values either. So that's why we're talking about it. As you know, I try to really start to grapple with and unpack topics that are like relatively complex or that people don't talk about enough. I just don't feel like people talk about things enough, but that's because this is like my area of interest and my area of passion, right? So yeah, we're gonna get into it, and I hope that it helps you. Really, my overarching goal in this particular episode is that I hope that it helps you to live life on your own terms a little bit more. Now, that on your own terms comes with like a really big asterisk, which I'll get into. But for me, that is really one of the major reasons for living or points in life. And I'm not saying that I have the answers to the meaning of life, but I definitely think that a big purpose since we found ourselves on this earth is to at least live according to our own terms and not according to different expectations that may have been placed on us, right? You might be wondering, like, why is she so passionate about this in the first place? Like, what is her deal? And depending on when you first discovered the stuff that I've been putting out online, if you've been here for a minute, if you've been here since 2015, you will know. If you've been here in the last year or so, I feel like most people have come in the last year, you may not know, so I'll give you a quick rundown. I have a really interesting and maybe, according to some people, like unconventional career story, which basically starts working in finance and now running my own marketing company and being a marketer. That's like the long story short. But in that has been like many, many twists and turns. And one of the things that I get emailed and messaged and asked about a lot is from people who want to make a transition in their life. They want to go from A to B, or they want to go from 1 to A, like they want to completely transition the set of rules and circumstances of their life, or they're trying to break into a path that they think that I have charted. And with the first group who are trying to make a transition, I think this will really help you, because my transition has practical elements of it, but it actually all started with the non-practical stuff. And when I say practical, I can probably replace that with the word physical. So people expect me to say, you should do this and you should post this on LinkedIn and you should do that. And definitely that's an outpouring of how you get from A to Z, from 1 to A, from, that side to this side. But it's the non-practical or the non-physical stuff that really got that emotion and, in my view, sustains it as well, which is why I even do this podcast, right? This podcast for me is an expression of the things that I'm learning. It's not me having all the answers, but the process of learning and developing has helped me make transitions in my like corporate and business career, which on the surface doesn't have anything to do with what we're talking about on this podcast. However, it's all connected. And then the second group of people that typically reach out to me, like I said, they're trying to maybe chart the path that I've charted. And I really struggle with those questions because I'm like, my path, there was no path. And in my interview that I did at the beginning of this year with the Magnify podcast, I kind of explained that my whole life, career, adulthood has been like this hodgepodge of activities that on the surface may not look directly connected, but when you look back, you see that it's all like this incredible like tapestry of weird things that don't look like they connect, but somehow they all feed into each other. So when I talk about manifestation, I'm talking about the practices that I have done to help me live the best version of my life that I am able to live right now, that I'm aware of. And it's one of the things that is helping me to navigate the journey of continuing to build that, of continuing to go from level 0 to level 1 to level 1 to level 2, and so on and so on. It's a core part of what I do. And I think because of the way that, you know, people talk about religion and people feel about spirituality, people feel like I'm a this, so I can't do that. Or I believe in this, so I can't believe in that. And I really just want to challenge that a bit, because some of the things that we think are like new phenomenon in spirituality have been existing and been effective since the dawn of time, because humans, or since the dawn of humans, let me say, because fundamentally I believe that while we evolve and while technology shifts and it impacts the way that we live, at the core of it, how our bodies work, how our souls work, how our minds work, there are certain human longings or spiritual principles that really outstand the test of time. So something you might think is like a cool trend that everyone's doing and you don't want to partake in it is actually just generations and centuries of essentially spiritual laws. Now, I follow a bunch of people and I do like courses and I invest my time and my money into like learning more about this kind of stuff, but understanding spiritual laws has been one of the biggest things over the last like 3-4 years that has changed my life. So I think it's really important. It sounds very random. If this isn't your first episode of listening to this podcast, you probably know that this is not a personal development podcast about how you need to work more to do XYZ, although it has a big impact on your personal development. It's all about that unseen stuff, the stuff that isn't talked about as much, and the stuff that kind of needs a bit more unpacking. So before we even go into the depths, I think it's really important to get on the same page with definitions here. And I tend to do this a lot, especially when words have been like gone viral or they've been thrown around a lot. We can attach our biases, our prejudices, but even our fears or our doubts or our skepticisms to certain words that we lose their meaning. So first things first, let's define what the word manifestation actually means, not what someone has construed it to mean in their magazine or in like pop culture at the moment. Let's actually focus on the definition. Let's start there, right? Because even though the word manifestation has been claimed by different cultural practices, my goal is to really unpack what the root of the word is and then work from there. So, okay, let's go with a simple Google definition. I think Google's more than enough to kind of get you going and helping you to do what you need to do, right? So manifestation is an event, an action, or an object that clearly shows or embodies something abstract or theoretical, e.g., the first obvious manifestations of global warming. I'd also add, when it talks about embody something abstract or theoretical, I think that can also be extended into spiritual or unseen, because something abstract is like hard to get to grips with, right? And I think the spiritual world and like spirituality and things that we can't see, our emotions, our mental health, etc., they can sometimes be quite abstract because they're not physically like seen. And if I was to summarize that definition, it's basically bringing something that wasn't visible, that isn't something we can like physically behold, bringing that into our physical lives. So bringing something that isn't visible or perceptible into our physical lives or into our physical world, right? That's all it is. It's taking this abstract thing that we can't really like see or touch or feel and like letting it come to life or take root in a physical form, right? Very simple. That's what manifestation is, the actual word manifestation. If it was a verb or if it was a noun, that's what it's about. It's about the physical coming to life of a specific thing. And I believe, and we'll talk about it through the course of this episode, that most things that move the needle in the physical world started in the spiritual or the unseen world, right? Everybody had an idea. If you built something, you had an idea first. If you sang, you had a vision of what you wanted first. It's always something intangible that is like the ignition that starts the bringing to life of the physical thing. So now that we're all on the same page, let's dive into the things that I've learned about the art of manifestation. And I will say, like in the spirit of the name of this podcast, take what you need. Everyone's life is unique. Yours may not follow these exact same steps, but have a think, embrace it, think about where it applies to your life and take it from there. So my first thoughts about the art of true spiritual manifestation is that it's actually like, it's inherent. Kind of like the definition, it's unseen. And it can usually start with your vision, your imagination, and your inklings that you've had from a young age. So when people talk to me about how do I go from here to here, or I don't really know what I want to do with my life, or I don't know how to bring this idea to life, I always start with, what are the gifts that you've been given right now? And when I say gifts, I don't mean like special talents, although it could be special talents. I mean the gift of a passion, the gift of a curiosity, the gift of like an idea that, oh, I think I might be interested in this. Even that is good enough to get started with manifesting the next phase of your life, or a life on your own terms. I find that in life, it's so easy for us to dismiss our passions and our interests, especially if they've been with us for years and years and years, because they just feel so natural. They feel almost like mundane. Because it's been with us for a long time and it's not new and exciting, we sometimes overlook how important they can be, these inklings, these passions, these interests, to actually directing us to the next phase of life and show us where life is taking us next. Now, I said it's inherent, right? And I said that it starts with visions, imaginations, and ideas. I think the biggest difference here between what I believe is true spiritual manifestation versus this kind of new pop version that I think can actually be a big distraction in life, is that manifestation isn't about an idea that you've just conjured up. Manifestation, as I've said, is inherent. It starts with those inklings that have been natural to you from the beginning. For me, manifestation is not, I've gone out last night and I've seen somebody and they have a certain thing, they have a car or they have a bag that I want, and now that's what I'm manifesting. I understand that there'll be many people who can talk about why that works for them, but I think that life, to be honest with you, is, and don't get me wrong, I think I've said this before, like I like nice things, it's fine, but I don't think the essence of manifestation is about seeing something, wanting it and having it. That just sounds like shopping to me and acquisition, which is fine, but it's just not what I think the core of manifestation is. I think manifestation has its true power, its true impact, and its ability to change your life when it's offshoots and when it comes from those inherent, deep down, original desires, curiosities, ideas, and thoughts that were kind of like sown in you from the beginning. And I said earlier that for me, manifestation is also living life on your own terms. And I said that had a massive asterisk, right? Because for me, living life on my own terms is living according to my original design. It's who I am. It's the desires that were placed in me from birth. It's the strengths. It's the creativity. It's the energy that was given to me as an individual before the trends of society came in, before the pressures of society came in, before societal expectations, friends' expectations, even the expectations that I may have had of myself based on things that I'd seen around me. Manifestation in its true beautiful form is actually about getting back to who you really are deep down and the things that really set you alight, whether or not it was trendy. Now, it may still sound quite like abstract, and to be honest, we're talking about abstract things in this episode, so just like bear with me. And that's because it actually takes a lot of effort. People underestimate how much effort manifestation takes. It's much easier to see what someone else has and be like, I want to manifest that, and good luck with that. But the true manifesting energy that can actually really change the trajectory of your life for the better and forever requires you to take a step back and really get to know yourself. There's a phrase which says, make a careful exploration into who you are and sink yourself into it. And that's in Galatians 6. And that is the precursor for then being able to manifest the right thing. All of this is to say is that there's a big difference between seeing something and wanting it because someone else has told you that it's nice. You've seen an ad, you've seen a billboard, you've seen these organic trends that pop up online, which in my view are never organic or are rarely organic or are amplified by something else, and wanting that. And then being able to understand the path that you're uniquely walking in. Because when you identify that path, you feel so much more confident. You feel so much more bold to pursue it. And the fruit that comes out of that, and when I say fruit basically means like the results that people start to see. They're like, oh my gosh, how did you do that? This is crazy, blah, blah, blah. That's because when you are living your unique life path, it will be kind of shocking. It may not be headline news. It doesn't mean everyone's going to be famous, but it will just come together in such a way that the people in your immediate circle will be like, hold up, what's going on? And that's what I want for everyone. And I see it. And when people ask me, they ask me questions about how did you get this? And I love that you're doing this. And I'm like, I love and I'm really happy that you are so inspired or excited by what you can see. But this is literally the manifestation of things that I had understood and established years ago. And now this is just like literally the fruit of it, or the leaves of deep roots that were underground for so long. And that's what I think, like I said, I feel like that's a big point in life. Like that's a big part of why we're here. So for me, it's such a joy to see people be able to unlock that. Okay, so if the first step to manifesting is like understanding the inherent desires or curiosities or inklings that you have, the next step is being able to work with God to bring it all together. Remember that manifestation is about taking something abstract or like spiritual or intangible and like bringing it into fruition in our human life. And I think one of the best analogies of this is this idea of a seed, which is used like quite commonly in certain circles. And it's this idea that I may plant a seed, someone else may water it, but it's God that ultimately makes it grow. We get this idea from God. We take action, big point. You take action. It's not wishing. You take action, and then God allows it to grow and develop and open up new doors as and when the right time is the right time. Okay, so the next principle of manifestation is all about like agreement and alignment. And that can involve prayer or journaling or like thinking prayer, but it's not asking for stuff. And I think this is kind of where we get a little bit, things get a little bit tricky, or it's been an area that's like really kind of misunderstood, because I think when people hear the word prayer, a lot of people think about you're asking God for something, you're asking God to make things happen. But before you even get to wanting to make things happen, which is obviously a form of manifestation, right? Taking something from an idea, from an intangible into something physical. But before you even start asking for that, the step that gets missed in praying and manifestation is before you ask for something, you need to be in alignment. So in my prayer time, my main ask, before I even start to go on this endeavor of building businesses or wanting to build relationships or all these different things, my first prayer is actually, God, I kind of want these things over here, and I think this is the direction of my life, but can you just help me to refine it so that I can know the best direction for my life? Because I know as a human who is influenced, let's not ever get it twisted. You are influenced, or I am influenced, let me just speak for myself, but I am influenced by all the stuff I see around me, by like new shiny things and things that seem to be the easy way out or the trending way out or the popular way to do things. I know that I'm influenced. So after I've, been aware of my inklings and who I am and my desires and all that stuff we discussed, my next thing is like, okay, God, so I'm bringing all of that stuff. Some of that may be inherent, like we've said, some of that may have been the gifts that have been given to me from the beginning, but I acknowledge that some of that within that space, it may be mixed up in, some trends or things that I've just seen with my eyes that I'm like, yeah, I want a bit of that. Can you just help me to just refine it? So when I get a bright idea, and I'm like, oh, I think this is good, I'm always like, God, actually, I want you to take this now and just, I'm happy with wherever you want it to go. So I actually wrote down a couple of the things that I typically like try and pray, especially when I'm trying to specifically manifest the next direction of life, specifically gain clarity over where I'm going next, or specifically when I'm trying to align my brain or train myself to pursue a particular journey or start a new challenge. I will literally say things like, and I write this down and I read it out loud, I'm like, my Father in heaven, I humbly come before you. I put my agenda before you, my thoughts, my good ideas, my plans, and I lay them down in full submission to you as I seek your face for direction and clarity. So I have brought some stuff into the conversation with God, which is great, but I also accept that it may need to be refined. And another thing I've written down in my like writings, my reflections, and in my like affirmations is God, my main caveat is that I'm human and I don't always know what's best for me. So above all my human imaginations, I acknowledge you as sovereign. So may your will be done. And I think for me, this is when I said, again, this whole idea of living life on your own terms comes with this like big asterisk. That is the asterisk for me, that my own terms are only as good as my original design. And I did not design myself. I did not see myself and say, you're going to be born in this place and you're going to have these natural skills and these are going to be your parents and this is going to be your scenario. So that I know I'm not the original designer, and part of my journey is to be as connected to that original design as possible. And these are the things that help me get out of my own way. And when I'm out of my own way, I can manifest the right things in my life. A lot of the conversations on manifestation are just about like, whatever you want, you can have it. And there might be a school of thought where, you know, that works in certain scenarios, but it typically comes with a cost that I don't think is necessary to pay, whether it's strife, whether it's like constantly chasing the next thing, whether it's a sense of lack of fulfillment because now you've brought things into your life that actually weren't the things that were going to fill up your soul and make you satisfied and make you content and make you feel like you're living a life worth living. So I've talked about finding the inkling and then being in alignment. And I also mentioned agreement. And this is kind of what I wanted to like go into next, which is spiritual, psychological, and verbal agreement, right? And there's a little bit more that comes afterwards, but we'll call it spiritual / psychological agreement, and then like verbal agreement. So when I talk about agreement, especially psychological, spiritual, and verbal agreement, this is where affirming the words that you've received. I call them words, but they could be the ideas or etc. But the words that God has given you, the promises that you have received while you've gone through the process of being in alignment and finding out if you're aligned with where God wants you to be. Once you do that, you kind of actually need to agree with it. And this is another place where people struggle, actually. This is where psychological fear kicks in, because sometimes you have this like, you know, this is where your life is supposed to go, but because the situation looks so different and so far from where you could be going, you sort of intellectually disconnect and you kind of don't believe it. That needs to change. One of the keys to spiritual manifestation is actually believing and agreeing psychologically that this thing is actually going to happen. Now, that can be really hard, especially if it looks impossible or it looks like it's going to take ages. But the truth is, it's the key to being able to turn something that is abstract and that is invisible into a physical manifestation in your life. So you're going to have to give it a try. And there's so many different foundational principles for this. One of the biggest ones is the verse, which is like, as a man thinks, so is he in his heart. And that man is a gender neutral man. And it basically means whatever you truly think about yourself, whatever you truly think about the journey of your life, whatever you truly think about whether you can actually manifest a specific moment or the specific life circumstance, whether you think you can, if you think you can manifest it, you will. If you think you can't manifest it, you won't. That's just the truth. You can say all these different things to people, but in your mind, in your heart, if you don't believe you can, it's never going to happen. So part of our life's journey is to figure out how we can train and retrain our brains to agree with the vision way before it even manifests. That could be the blocker. You might be thinking in this episode, like, okay, I've had all these ideas, I've had these dreams, these things, and I think they're going to happen, but they just haven't happened. I would ask you, do you really believe that it will? And that can be hard. One of the biggest challenges of this life is to not give up hope and to train your brain to believe something that you can't even see in front of you. And I have so many examples and reference points where you see this kind of dynamic around agreement at play. And for me, a lot of those come from the Bible, which is not a surprise if you listen to this particular podcast. And that's because a lot of, especially in the Old Testament, the stories that are accounted for are examples of the human condition. And I feel like the whole Bible and spiritual scriptures, they give you a blueprint for the different kind of spiritual laws. I mentioned like spiritual laws and principles earlier. And even though the circumstances may be different from yours, in a previous episode, I actually said, like, don't look for advice, look for the underlying principles that have applied to different people's lives. That is so real. Like, you may not be a woman living in the Middle East in pre-Jesus times wearing a robe and your husband isn't a shepherd, but there are some key core principles that continue to remain true and continue to bear fruit and continue to bring results if you look properly. So two of those examples which I absolutely love are Mary and Elizabeth. So quick rundown. So Mary is the relative to this woman called Elizabeth, and Elizabeth is really, really old, as it says. So she's really, really old, and her husband gets visited by one of the angels of the Lord who literally says, don't be afraid, your prayer has been heard, and you will have a son, and so and so and so. And at the same time, like I said, she had a relative called Mary, and this Mary is the mother of Jesus, and she's much younger. She's not even married yet. And in a similar, these two stories are told like side by side in Luke 1. And so while Elizabeth is pregnant, the angel goes to Mary and is like, don't be afraid, you found favor and you're going to conceive this child, etc., etc., etc. And it's a very interesting parallel story that's being told at the same time. One, because you can see that Elizabeth has been asking and waiting and hoping. She had a desire, she had an inkling. It wasn't coming, but that passion was still held, that belief was still held. And then Mary, on the other hand, is kind of, maybe blindsided. Maybe the course of her life actually went somewhere else. But once she receives that word, and when I say word, it's like things that people speak. Once she receives the word that actually you are to have a son and this is going to happen, she says very simply, I'm the Lord's servant. May your word to me be fulfilled. And that is the agreement that we're talking about. Because as I mentioned at the beginning, some of these inklings and some of these moments are things that we may desire. And sometimes they're things that have kind of come into our lives, maybe unexpectedly, or maybe earlier or later than we've thought. And it's our option to like opt into the journey like Mary did, which I find that whole dynamic super interesting. So the two of them meet, and Elizabeth is really kind of celebrating this news. And she says, blessed is she who believes that God will fulfill all his promises to her. And I think that is what I mean when I talk about agreement and alignment. And it starts like, it might be psychological and spiritual and emotional, but it's also verbal as well. And believing, you know how people say seeing is believing? No, believing is the thing that gets you to seeing the manifestation of what you are hoping for or what you have been told is coming into your life. So if you're familiar with the story, you'll know that Elizabeth's husband, who was actually told this directly, was a little bit more like, we're old, like we're past, we cannot have kids, like what is this, what are you saying? And for that reason, he literally says like, how can I be sure of this? I'm an old man and I'm well along in years. And the angel's like, basically, because you said that, you know what, you're going to be silent now until the day that the child is born, which is always, it's quite dramatic. So he couldn't speak. The story is like he couldn't speak for ages until the day that the child is born. But I think that story illustrates a truth. So let's just back up. I know it sounds a little bit crazy, like this old man, him and his wife can't have children. Now they're going to have a child, and now he suddenly can't talk till the child is born. Like, it's all a bit crazy, although there's so many miraculous moments that happen in all of our lives, but that's another topic for another day. But let me frame this question with you, right? So Zechariah and his wife have been praying, or have prayed for a child, right? They prayed. And suddenly he's having this like divine moment where it's being confirmed, like, you're having the child. If I was praying every single day for a new car, or not every single day, but if I was praying and I really wanted this new car and it wasn't happening for ages, if someone comes and tells me you're going to get a car tomorrow, would it make sense for me to then be like, really? I've been waiting for a car for ages. Why are you bringing it now? Like, that doesn't make sense. And I think Zechariah's like doubt, while understandable, put my hands up, is understandable. Past the age of having a child, has probably been waiting to have a child for absolutely ages. While it's understandable, that's just not the way that manifestation, say that word very carefully, spiritual manifestation works. You know that you've been in this conversation with God about making something happen or aligning your life in a certain way. It may be taking longer than you thought, but that doesn't mean that you should drop your hope. That doesn't mean you should throw away your confidence. That doesn't mean you should start to shrink your aspirations. And it can be hard. And like I said, one of the biggest challenges of life is not giving up hope. But all because it's hard doesn't mean it shouldn't be done. And as I've said, I really feel like that's one of the battles of our whole lives, right? To believe that something can happen when it seems like all the odds are stacked against us. And in James 1, it says, for the ambivalent person believes 1 minute and doubts the next. Being undecided makes you become like rough seas, driven and tossed by the wind. You're up 1 minute and tossed down the next. When you're half-hearted and wavering, it leaves you unstable. Can you really expect to receive anything from God when you're in that condition? Question. Hard question. Real question though. This really puts into context how a strong belief is at the heart of the art of spiritual manifestation. It's not about putting something on your vision board and then not really like believing it. It's not about putting something on your vision board and then something happening the next day to kind of throw all of that. Oh, as I'm saying that, it's even speaking to me, but it's definitely not about putting something on your vision board and then the next day something happens to maybe like shake that hope, and then you're like, oh, I'm done, like it's not happening. The goal, the practice of building up your spiritual strength is actually to be able to hope in spite of hope. And there's another verse somewhere which I'll add in the show notes that says like, Abraham in hope against all hope believed. And it's this idea that even though his body was as good as dead, again, another story about conceiving and being able to have kids in the old age, it literally says, even though his body was as good as dead, he still believed that he would be the father of many nations. Again, it's another story that we can get into. We won't, because I want to keep this podcast relatively short. But the key to being able to manifest some of the most important things in your life, the things that you're meant to experience, the things that you're meant to have, the things that you're meant to conquer, the things that you're meant to achieve, is actually believing that they can happen even when it looks like the odds are completely stacked against you. So now that you've identified the curiosities, the inklings, the things that are kind of moving you towards a specific thrust and destination in life, and you've been able to align those with your original design, with what God is calling you to, and you've agreed spiritually, verbally, with that process, even if it doesn't look like it's going to happen in that moment, the final thing that you have to do is walk in physical obedience. Now, when I say physical obedience, that just means the things that, and I can't tell you what those are, by the way, you need to go into this journey of like prayer and seeking to understand. But for some people, you might start thinking, okay, I've been hoping that I get this job in this particular place. So for example, you might be on this journey of manifesting a new job. Again, remember, it's manifesting in the context of how I've described it in this podcast, not in any other context. So you might be on this journey of, you know, being able to bring this concept, this word, this vision of a new job into your reality. And the way that you've been going about it has been really umming and ahhing about like, do I want a new job? Is it going to happen? And you suddenly feel like through your prayer and your journaling and your reflection that actually I need to update my status on LinkedIn. Now that might feel a bit awkward because maybe my colleagues will see it, you might wonder, or maybe like people will think that I'm overreaching because I'm maybe updating my status and it looks a bit more senior than I am. Do it. If that's the inkling, if that's the calling, the action that you feel like needs to happen, do it. So many of us want to elevate in life and shift and go into the next phase, but we never want to do the weird thing. We never want to say the weird thing. We never want to embrace it. And that step that you take, that weird thing that you do, that thing that feels like a bit of a like emotional, psychological risk, is what's going to help you cross over into the next phase. It's going to be the thing that helps you manifest that thing that you have been wanting to see take place in your life. When you're elevating in your life and when you're transitioning into a new phase, you will be challenged to do things that are out of the ordinary, that are risky, that aren't what society expects you to do, and you need to be brave enough to do it. This doesn't mean that you have to blow up your life or do something reckless. For most of us, the biggest risk that we take is departing from other people's expectations of us, and most importantly, our expectations of ourselves. And that's it for another episode of the Take What You Need podcast. I'm really enjoying this kind of situation that we've got going on. So all the standard things always apply: like, subscribe, share this with someone, share this with a friend. I still want to get to over 1,000 followers on YouTube so that I can continue to grow the channel and reach more people. And one day we will work towards having this weekly. But in the meantime, let this marinate for the next couple of weeks, and I will speak to you very soon.